Look at the modern presidency. It operates inside an impenetrable bubble, shielded by elite security and 24/7 medical care, moving at a relentless pace. But historically, the Oval Office has been one of the most dangerous workplaces in America. To date, 8 sitting presidents have died on the job. If we map out those 8 casualties, they split perfectly down the middle. 4 men were killed by assassins, and 4 died from natural causes. The assassins' bullets are well documented, but early commanders-in-chief also had to survive the environment they lived in, the food they ate, and most dangerously, their own physicians. The timeline of presidential deaths maps the trial and error evolution of human medicine. In the 18th century, medical science was largely guesswork. George Washington's final days give us a clear baseline for how little doctors actually understood. After a ride in freezing rain, Washington developed a severe throat infection. His doctors treated this routine inflammation by cutting his arm and aggressively draining his blood. They removed roughly 80 ounces, actively accelerating his death. By the 19th century, the threat moved from the czar treatments to environmental hazards. For generations, people believed William Henry Harrison caught pneumonia after giving a 2-hour inauguration speech in the freezing rain without a coat. Recent forensic analysis points to a completely different culprit. Harrison didn't get sick until 3 weeks after that speech. He likely went into septic shock after drinking contaminated water piped directly into the White House. A few decades later, the lack of basic food safety proved just as lethal. Zachary Taylor attended a sweltering 4th of July celebration in Washington. To cool off, he rapidly consumed a large bowl of raw cherries and several glasses of milk, contracted severe gastroenteritis, and died 3 days later. Being the most powerful person in the country offered absolutely zero defense against microscopic pathogens and medieval remedies. As the 19th century came to a close, the primary threat shifted toward assassins, but doctors remained the final executioners. When James A. Garfield was shot by a mentally unstable man at a train station, the bullet lodged in his back without hitting a vital organ. He survived the initial trauma. What slowly killed Garfield over the next 80 days was his medical care. Doctors repeatedly probed the wound with their bare, unsterilized hands, and one of them managed to puncture his liver. 20 years later, William McKinley faced a nearly identical failure. While greeting crowds at the Temple of Music in Buffalo, an anarchist shot him in the abdomen. McKinley survived the initial impact, but doctors couldn't locate the bullet inside him. Gangrene set in, and he died shortly after. 2 consecutive, preventable deaths finally convinced lawmakers that standard security wasn't enough, forcing the Secret Service to take over full-time presidential protection. Garfield and McKinley were caught in a deadly historical gap. They lived long enough to see the mass production of the revolver, but died right before the widespread adoption of germ theory. While 20th century medicine finally began deterring basic infections and bad water, it couldn't remove the physical strain of the office. Franklin D. Roosevelt relied on modern medical care to manage high blood pressure, heart disease, and polio. He led the country through the Great Depression and the Second World War while paralyzed from the waist down, resulting in a visible physical toll that culminated in a fatal stroke during his 4th term. As antibiotics defeated bacteria and the Secret Service deterred assassins, the physical weight of the presidency emerged as the ultimate biological test. The clinical records explain the biology, but the final words of these leaders reveal the human reality beneath the title. Some exits read like mythology. Both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson famously died on exactly the same day, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, with Adams's final words recognizing that his longtime rival still survived. Most exits, however, are far more grounded. Millard Fillmore spent his last moments complimenting the taste of his soup, and Ulysses S. Grant, a decorated war hero whose throat was being eaten away by cancer, used his final breath to simply ask for a glass of water. In those final moments, the sweeping authority of a commander-in-chief completely dissolves, leaving behind a mortal human facing the same biological realities as everyone else. But the timeline of these deaths does show a clear victory. This chart maps the average life expectancy of U.S. For the first century of American history, survival was essentially a coin toss, with lifespans hovering around 70 years old. As we move through the 20th and into the 21st century, we see a dramatic, undeniable upward shift. The line breaks past 80 years and stretches rapidly toward the century mark. We have modern proof points for this extreme longevity. Gerald Ford and George H.W. Bush both lived well into their 90s, and Jimmy Carter recently passed the 100-year milestone. We started with George Washington, a man who was intentionally bled to death by his physicians for a simple throat infection. Today, a former president reaching a century of life is an expected reality. The timeline of presidential deaths demonstrates that even for the world's most powerful leaders, medical science remains the ultimate safeguard.